Hello and welcome to part 3b of this long patrol. And yes, I do know that sounds contrived, but honestly, I've recorded parts 4 and 5 and called them parts 4 and 5, and they're well done. I do not fancy re-recording them as well as, because part 3 has had to be split up. So, that's why 3b and 3a have appeared. And the rules that I should never record things in out of order again. That should be implemented. Yeah, I'll probably still do it again. As you can see, my office is still looking a little bit of a mess. There are more books down here. There are even more books down here. They're coming in, and it is getting built. But that is not why you are here. Although, it does look rather good, that picture behind me. Though that's going to be the model railway. So I might well have space for pictures along that wall. That might be where I stick pictures. I am considering where I'm going to be putting pictures up. I have various plans and ideas. I might stick a picture rail in there. It should work. Anyway. So, back to the Secretary of State for the Navy's Keith Speed's talk. His speech in this debate. No less important is the Royal Navy Reserve, which, though much smaller than the Army Reserves, is nevertheless essential for the Royal Navy's readiness for war. The reserves perform some vital wartime roles, notably mine countermeasures, naval control of shipping, and some communications tasks. Now, this then gets into questions, but this video is going to get a special mention. Hello, you. The trainee assistant, fluffy research assistant, has come to say hello. And to point out, this one will be getting into the concept of reserves and saying about how ships are being procured for reservists to use. Now, I would say River-class Batch 1s are perfect for reservists to use and will be perfect rallying things. Hello, you. Oh, hello. After all, if you're going to try and entrust the university naval reserve units with actual Archer-class little ships, but you don't trust the regular reserves with them, or apparently they don't need them, it seems a bit weird. Hello, yes. I know, you want to go garden, don't you? Hello. So, hello from the assistant fluffy research assistant. He realizes his bigger, more experienced colleague gets more time in here at the moment, but that's because he's teething and there is a lot of woodwork in here. I love him dearly, but teething and woodwork do not go well together, do they? No, they don't. Go. Thank you, sis. Anyway. Sir Frederick Burden of Gillingham. I hope that my honourable friend will take into consideration the important fact that some naval accommodation is becoming redundant. Would it be possible to make that accommodation available to the families of men who are serving in the Navy or leaving the Navy? Mr. Speed, we are considering the possibility of selling married quarters to ex-servicemen. I hope to say a little more about that when I reply to the debate. We have a planned strength for the RN of 6,750, but I regret to say that we are 1,500 short. However, the improved training bounties announced last summer, together with the introduction of a new class of minesweeping trawlers, should boost recruiting and retention. Last year, I announced the introduction of an R&R Air branch. This should technically be called the reintroduction of an R&R Air branch, as there have been plenty of reservists in World War II, but we'll skip over that. Drawing from pilots who have not long left the Navy and hence have recent flying experience. They will not form separate squadrons, but will be used mainly to augment the frontline squadrons. We are looking for 50 officer aircrew at present, and the signs are that we should get them. Doing things like, I don't know, P8s and modern E7 AWACS, which are all based off 737s. Perhaps we could have some more airframes and have them reservists as well. After all, there are many 737s and various treble sevens. I'm sorry, which are currently used by various airlines. In sum, the manpower picture for the Navy is partly of strongly encouraging trends, partly of daunting problems with us, or looming ahead. I've spoken largely of numbers, and many of our manpower problems have to be resolved mainly in that form. Those are the problems which I see constantly in London. There is another side to manpower, which I discover whenever I can get out of London to visit the fleet and establishments. It is the cheerful and exciting atmosphere of a fine and robust service full of professional pride. There is, I believe, a deep sense of confidence in the fleet that it is getting the right ships and weapon systems for its tasks. The arrival of Invincible has been a particular fillip to morale. We cannot neglect either the equipment of the Navy or the numbers, but honourable members have had direct contact with the Navy in recent months and will share my view that throughout, in the Royal Navy, Royal Marines, Queen Alexandra Royal Naval Nursing Service, Women's Royal Naval Service, and the Reserves, we have men and women of quality and enthusiasm which will compare with any we have known before. I have not yet mentioned the Royal Marines. I'm pleased to say that officer and other rank recruitment are buoyant. Last year, they achieved their highest ever peacetime recruiting target. A glance at their history and their operations, which they have been involved in recently, stands as a witness to their unparalleled record of courage and flexibility. By the way, RN Royal Marines continue to maintain a huge level of recruitment and positive recruitment and are very attractive. Even a quick scan of the people and what planning to get there on Twitter would tell you that, let alone meeting the Royal Marines themselves. Yet consistently, they keep getting cut, not because of the number of recruits coming in, but because people see it as a way of saving money. One would suggest if one has a unit which is so capable and has no trouble recruiting, that perhaps what you should do is cut the units which you can't recruit for. But, that's just me. The importance of Marines' role under NATO demonstrates the confidence which the Alliance has in them. A confidence which is fully justified, as I saw during a recent visit to the annual 3-month winter deployment in Norway. A large proportion of the Royal Marines is specially trained for mountain Arctic warfare throughout the Norwegian winter, and very impressive they were under the most arduous conditions. The fact that our commandos have worked closely over many years with the Royal Netherlands Marine Corps is an excellent example of Allied cooperation. Woohoo! It's always good to have the Allies in there, isn't it? It really is good to have the Allies in there. And as you can see, that's a fairly impressive statement what's going on. They are working hard. They have a good vision. They have all these things going on. In many ways, I would say in 1980s, they have a better vision than we do today. I would say we have got, and I see this quite a lot, cut solution happy. We have a problem. Well, what's the easiest way? Ask for more money? Put something into reserve? Announce we're putting into reserve, or we're mothballing? And actually do maintain and mothball it? Or cut it? Well, actually mothballing and actually maintaining something is quite difficult. But it makes more sense to me. We were talking in the previous episode, in the previous part, about manpower issues, human resources, getting the sailors and the senior personnel. If you really are short, and it's not a shortage of junior personnel, because we are recruiting ample numbers of them. We keep being told how bumper the recruitment is, like this speech is going into. We are short senior personnel. And the solution is to get rid of ships. Well, I have never known for ships to be cut for them to be replaced. Unless they are replaced as they go out of service, the ships when gone, they are gone. And everyone going, oh, but will you trust this government? It won't be this government making the decision. This is the thing. We're talking about replacements which will be coming in the mid-2020s, late 2020s, early 2030s. I.e., 1, 2, 3 general elections away. It might still be a Conservative government. It might not be a Conservative government. There is a possibility it's still Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, but there's also a possibility it's a different Prime Minister. It doesn't matter which government it is, which party it is that makes up the government. I can be certain, looking at the track record, it won't be the current Defence Secretary. We go through those like we're running out of, like they are popcorn and we haven't eaten for a year. You know, those things, they don't last. Every time you get one that's just been in long enough to be competent, they get moved off to somewhere, or they have a scandal, a weird one. So the thing is, you cannot place any faith in jam tomorrow. There is no jam tomorrow. There is no tomorrow. When decisions are made, they are made today. There'll be another problem tomorrow, which will be a decision of that day. There'll be another problem the next day, a decision of that day. There is not long-term thinking going on. If there was a long-term thinking going on, and it was a case of, right then, we're going to do this, it would be possible. We talk about the carrier gap. Yes, there was a gap. There's been a gap in naval aviation. They got rid of the Sea Harriers. They got rid of the Invincible class. The only reason they didn't get rid of the Queen Elizabeth class was because they couldn't cut them without costing more money. Now, they are the centerpieces of our strategy going forward, and everything's based around the carriers. Well, hey, it's lovely. But it's not exactly long-term thinking going on. Again, I refer you to 1980. This debate seems to be a good font of long-term thinking, and some of it was being implemented, but then not happened, and well. The same is true of the pre-stocking in Norway of over-snow vehicles for both the United Kingdom and Netherlands forces. It has long been recognised by the Alliance that its flanks are key areas, and the Royal Marines are proud to have so important a role there. But that is not all. The House, I'm sure, will join me in recognising the valuable part played by the team of Royal Marines in the Rhodesia ceasefire monitoring force. It's a truly remarkable operation. Both this country and Zimbabwe owe a great debt of gratitude to the men of the Commonwealth Force for the vital work which they did in helping to bring the country to independence peacefully. Only last week, the Marines were called upon again when a company and headquarters element of 4-2 Commando, the Spearhead Unit, was flown to Villa, New Hebrides. That was one of the longest-range deployments ever undertaken at a short notice by the services. 3 VC-10 aircraft and 7 Hercules were involved to transport about 250 men, their vehicles, communications equipment, and other supplies over 10,000 miles. The first aircraft left Friday afternoon, travelling via Canada, United States, and Fiji. They arrived on Sunday morning, local time, and the deployment was completed by Wednesday. That operation demonstrates in the most practical way the well-organised efficiency and flexibility of our contingency arrangements. In a sense, 4-2 Commando, which, as I have indicated, provided the men, now in New Hebrides, epitomises the varied and demanding tasks which we asked the Royal Marines to perform. Last autumn, they were in Hong Kong as part of an emergency reinforcement to the garrison. Earlier this year, they were training in Norway, and now they are in the New Hebrides. But we should not forget that at home too, the Royal Marines have important jobs to do. The 4-1 Commando has just embarked upon a tour of duty in Northern Ireland, while 4-0 Commando has recently completed a 1-year residential tour there. The Royal Navy also make a valuable contribution to the activities of the security force in Northern Ireland. I should also like to take the opportunity to confirm that, as a forecast in Defence White Paper, a new unit of the Royal Marines was formed at Arbroath. Among its tasks will be that of responding to any incidents on our offshore gas and oil installations. This is the Comanche Company, which has already been mentioned. I spoke earlier about the role of the Royal Navy in NATO and the importance of our efforts in Eastland. On the southern flank and deployment outside NATO area, I should like to say a few words about the role the Royal Navy has to play in peacetime. With the likely introduction throughout the world of extended economic zones, that role has never been more important. Traditionally, it has involved the Royal Navy in fishery protection, a task which it has, of course, performed outstandingly. Now, however, we have a massive investment in offshore oil and gas installations, and it is vital that they are kept under regular surveillance and that arrangements exist to protect them. Both the Royal Navy and the RAF have a contribution to make. There is a program of frequent patrols by the Island-class offshore protection vessels and flights of Nimrod long-range reconnaissance aircraft. I have already mentioned that we have Comanche Company, which has the ability to react to any incidents on the rigs, and it regularly carries out exercises to test and improve our ability. Preparation, preparation, preparation. Again, the more you read into this, the more you start to realize this is a very thorough speech. It's a very thorough speech by the opposition. It's wonderful, these speeches. They give you a firm idea of what Britain's position was in the 1980s. But you see very quickly the gap between what is known and what is implemented. And how do I explain this? Well, we know they knew what the problems were. They knew what needed to be done. They understood them. And this goes back to the point I was making earlier. What were they protecting? What was the prices of the day? They were more important politically. Crisis in the NHS, crisis in the economy. You have all the things going on. You have industrial relations disputes. You have Britain in the 1980s coming out of the 1970s is facing a lot of trauma. And it will go through a lot more trauma. And again, it's very easy to start thinking, right, we can take a gap in this because it will be repaired at a certain point, 10 years' time or this time. We can gap this capability. But anytime anyone says the gap's going to last more than one parliament, they're meaning it's not going to be their problem. And it won't be them on the chopping block to make the decision. So you can't believe it. A sacred tenet of British constitutional law is that no parliament can bind the votes of a future parliament. You can't. You can't legislate to tell a future parliament what to do. And a government cannot tell what a future government want to do. So, when they announce a 10-year gap in something, in capability, what they're really doing is flicking a roll on the wheel of fortune. And sometimes it comes up and you're a winner. Yay. A lot of the time you're not. That's why it's called the Wheel of Fortune. And for something to go up, something else usually has to come down. There is always the other option. And this is probably going to sound terrible, but the more I read these debates and I go back in time and look at the very previous debates in Hansard, the more I get the idea that maybe the French don't have necessarily the worst idea on their systems. In that they discuss and debate and then they pass a law. It doesn't bind future parliaments on hands. It can't do that. Again, they can just pass another law. But it does require certain things to be done in that term of parliament. So it means that you have to make orders. You have to start procuring this. You have to start thinking about it. Governments have to. And in ways, it sort of balances some of the power away from government into Parliament's hands, which is kind of interesting considering if you look at what's happening, arguably, in a lot of Western politics. Parliaments have been steadily offloading responsibility onto the executive for every potentially messy problem as quickly as they can get in the last 20, 30 years. And yes, they have select committees and this and that, and they scrutinize things. And they make big speeches and talk. But it doesn't mean they actually put it forward. Or they actually stand up for it. For example, if all the MPs who represented towns which had significant numbers of people employed in defence and significant numbers of forces stationed in their towns formed a caucus and acted as a group in terms of securing enough funding for defence outside of political parties, putting it as a national issue beyond political politics. That would be a scary number of MPs for any government to take on. But it won't happen. Long term versus short term. Again, I'm using history and I'm talking about the current, and I'm talking about the current to relate to the history. In this scenario, we know the Invincible is being shouted about as being a beautiful carrier, a wonderful ship. But we also all know the history, I hope, if you don't, I'll do a video about it at some point, of CVA-01, which was the previous Queen Elizabeth class, which was never built, which were proper carriers. And when I say proper carriers, I mean they were the fixed wing cats and traps system, catabile system, like the American carriers. Not nuclear powered, but quite big, decent sized carriers. Probably the order of 60,000 tons when built. They were planned. And they were cancelled. And then the Royal Navy migrated a cruiser design, which was being allowed, into a through-deck cruiser, and eventually the Invincible class come out. They've schooled up missiles and a big radar on them, so they're still a cruiser, but, yeah. Anti-submarine warfare cruiser, lots of helicopters, and a ski ramp, so take Harriers. And they're made good. They managed to avoid the capability being lost by doing a lot of creative work. But they still lost carriers. But governments were sufficiently worried about the loss and the political damage it would do to them of cancelling the carriers that they were prepared to ignore the Royal Navy's blatant through-deck cruiser. In fact, they were prepared to sing about it. Both Labour and the Conservatives were prepared to sing about how great they were. These days, governments seem to rely on the idea that no one's interested in defence. It's a shame, really. Last slide. Another important peacetime role of the Royal Navy is search and rescue. In 1979, Royal Navy helicopters attended more than 350 incidents, rescuing more than 300 people. I pay tribute to the services, particularly for the part they played in the Fastnet operation in August. More recently, both the Navy and the RAF were involved in rescue efforts following the collapse of the oil rig support platform Alexander Kielland in the Efkos area of the North Sea. Further afield, an important example of humanitarian aid occurred in the past year when the island of Dominica was ravaged by a hurricane of exponential force last August. HMS Fife, guided missile destroyer, accompanied by the Royal Fleet Auxiliary Cherry Leaf, was dispatched at once to the area. Immediately on arrival, work was set in hand to restore basic services and tend the injured. The island's communication with the outside world had been cut, and the Fife performed a valuable service in helping to coordinate the rescue operation in providing radio links with other governments and international relief agencies. The crew cleared the road between the capital Roseau and the airport, restored the island's water supply, flew food and medical teams to outlying settlements, and rebuilt the island's hospital. That work continued until normality had begun to return. I have mentioned that operation at some length because I believe it right that the House and the country should be aware of the extent of such humanitarian efforts. They are fine examples of how the Royal Navy engenders goodwill and saves lives at home and abroad. I have spent a great deal of time dealing with service manpower, but I wish also to pay a warm and sincere tribute, as the honourable gentleman did, to the civilian support without which the Navy could not operate. Civil servants serving the Navy come in various guises: the armament expert dealing with nuclear weapons, the skilled electrical fitter in the dockyard working in unimaginable discomfort, the stores clerk providing the vital part to a sonar set, the master of one of our large fleet support tankers, the scientist designing electronic countermeasure sets of the next decade. All these are a far cry from the traditional image of the civil servant. Though of course they are needed too, but the senior service is well served by all its support staff. Of that, there is no question. The important thing, as I said, is the defence debate. Is to see that the organisation is as taut and efficient as possible, so that resources and manpower are not wasted. But also that the management structure of a big industrial enterprise like the dockyard is fully accountable and can manage its business. Finally, I confirm that last year has been one of the advance for the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines. Morale is high, as is the quality, professionalism and dedication of our men and women in the services. The government, notwithstanding the severe economic difficulties facing us as a nation, are implementing a NATO target of an increase of 3% in defence spending in real terms. The threat we face demands no less. However, with the cost of high technology and high quality weapons and equipment, there are difficult decisions or priorities that we have to make in our defence expenditure. We cannot by any means do all that we would like. We have constantly to be looking for better ways to manage our defences, save manpower and save money. This warning note has to be sounded because resolving our defence problems inevitably relies upon the resolving of our economic problems. In this first 13 months, we have made a good start in achieving both. Mr. Delio, on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, as you have just come back to the chair, you will not know that during his speech, the United Secretary of State made a momentous announcement about policy, namely that a British naval unit was going on a courtesy visit to China. I put it to you, Mr. Speaker, that this announcement should have been made not by the Undersecretary, with all courtesy to the Honourable Gentleman, but by the Secretary of State for Defence of the Prime Minister. This is a reckless gesture. It is playing with fire and raises the deepest policy implications. Mr. Speed. Further to the point of order, Mr. Speaker, this is a matter of public knowledge. It has been announced by my right honourable friend when in China at least 2 months ago and has appeared in all the national press. Oh, so there we go. The end of the speech. Sounds a lot like today. Pressing financial economic scenario. Lots of decisions needing to be made, and we all know what happens with not review. We all know that shortly after not review, but before the Falklands War, they actually do reverse some of the decisions on the cuts, especially to Fearless and Intrepid. They decide they do need LPDs after all. Landing platform docks, those lovely things which can land tanks and other heavy equipment and large numbers of Marines, as well as provide, well, in the case of Albion Borg, as well as providing the command and control facilities for them. I think Michael Clapp and Julian Thompson in the Bilge Pumps Christmas special had a lot to say about the quality of command and control facilities aboard Phyllis and Intrepid. Love them though we do. Ultimately, it's not an easy scenario for any government in any period to justify and balance the books. Defence expenditure is problematic. There's a great phrase in there, taught. And value for money basically is implied. The thing, and efficient, taught and efficient, value for money. Lovely phrases. But what does it mean in defence? You see, if you're a business and you're running and you run along business lines, then you want to have as little waste as possible, as little slack as possible, as little overheads as possible. Just-in-time logistics is based on the entire priority that you are delivering, and it's going out, so it's not wasting warehouse space. It's basically on the road almost as soon as it arrives. It's a great idea. Not the way in defence. You actually want stockpiles of goods. You want food. You want fuel. You definitely want munitions stockpiled. That's not efficient. Not by business terms, but it's very efficient by defence terms, because there is going to be a lag, just as we've seen with vaccine procurement and PPE and all the other stuff recently, between you wanting it and industry being able to spool up to supply it. And that was with PPE, which, okay, whilst a lot of PPE is a lot more complicated than these specs, missiles and shells, well, shells probably on the level of complication are about not too far away from these specs, but missiles, a long way away. Shells and missiles, they're going to take a lot longer to build. There's a far fewer number of factories that can actually build them. Far fewer people who can be trained, who are available, who have the skills to be slotted into those factories without a lot of significant training. And that's before we get on to the manufacture of the machines you need to actually build the parts, which you then need to be to make the missiles. It's not easy. And in the 1980s, just as in the 1970s and 1960s and 1950s, these are the words which are coming in. We want defences to be efficient. We want to be efficient on delivery of our strategic role. Well, defence isn't efficient. And this is going to sound strange. I'm not giving people an excuse for wasting money. You shouldn't have a waste of money. And there's classic examples of you wasting money in defence. So you trying to procure the moon, and when you just can't, and you decide you don't need to procure the moon. You just need a satellite. But having dockyards which are running at a level which justifies their full the employment of the personnel in there, but which is not actually their maximum utility, as in their spare space, is sensible. Why? Because in wartime, you're going to have damaged ships turning up out of the blue. You're going to have to suddenly surge a whole load of capability. This is what happened if you consider the Falklands War. The rapid mobilization of the Royal Navy was entirely based off the fact that there were a large number of dockyards which actually had spare capacity and could do it. Where are those dockyards these days? Admittedly, though, where are the ships down there that would be surged? That's one thing of keep cutting ships. You don't have to have as many dockyards to surge them. History has many lessons it can teach us. The 1980s are full of interesting debates and perspectives which we can learn from, which are not that far removed from our own times now in terms of the trials faced and the issues overcome. Different in context, but not necessarily so different in content. Ultimately, the thing you have to be most careful of in life is the person turning up and telling you they can fix all your problems, and it's easy. It's never easy to fix problems. It isn't. Most things in life worth doing require hard work, and most things in life which are anything worth value will require hard decision making, or will require extra effort. You want to talk about security of the net realm being the first priority of government? Someone did recently on my responses, and it fits in here. Well, if you want a small government, and let's be honest, Margaret Thatcher was actually not a fan of the idea of a small, minute government, as some people would understand it these days, then you've got to start thinking about what do you want that government to do. Defence is the first priority of the realm. Okay. But if you're going to run defence, well, you're going to need quite educated people. Because let's be honest, modern equipment isn't me picking up a hammer and bashing someone over the head. It is complicated systems. So you're probably going to need to make sure your populace is educated, which means you're going to need a school system and a university system, because let's be honest, the school system isn't going to produce enough. High enough level of education for it. Okay, right. Education. Also, I need to pay for all those things. Well, that means I need a taxation system. I need to find the money from somewhere, which means I need people to man the taxation. So I need those citizens, treasury. All right. Well, I've got my educated population who can build the weapons, and I've got the money to pay for the weapons and ships and the stuff like that. Okay. How do I move the components from point to point? Oh, it looks like I'm going to need railways and roads. Okay. Well, they can be they can be done by private companies, but rails these days tend to require a certain level of public funding in order to keep them viable, and frankly, it's cheaper to have roads done by government and national subscription, as in road tax or car tax or all the various other things you can do, than it is to have tolls everywhere. It might not seem like it, but it is on the overall scale, because you see, if I was going to build a toll road and I want to make money from it, I'm going to build it between places which is going to make me money, i.e. major cities. Trouble is, most armed forces, most military bases and naval shipyards are not in those major cities. They're usually outside them. They sometimes are far away from them, because they are ports which have very dangerous weapons in, which no one wants to put next to a city. So yeah, you're going to need infrastructure, which means you're going to need people to implement those roads and maintain those roads and those rails. Okay. So, while small government, defence-orientated government now has to have education up to university level, has to have taxation, and has to have infrastructure. But trouble is, if you've got all those things going on, there's no point having security abroad if you don't have security at home. So you're going to need police, because some people are not going to want to pay tax, for starters. Some people are going to be downright annoying, and you're going to need security for your bases and security for your roads to make sure they're safety. So, okay, now you need police. All right. But my workforce is now getting ill. Okay, so they're not building stuff, they're not educating, they're just getting ill. Okay. I need a health system. And again, there are various models of public-private involvement. There is the American system at one extreme. There's often the NHS put up as the other end. It's pick your flavor. But you're going to need a health system, and there is probably going to have to be a level of government involvement in that, because healthcare is expensive, and the trouble is the people who are working, i.e. your regular teachers, the people working in the factories building equipment and all these things, they tend to not be the ones who are the richest in society. So you're going to need some form of healthcare. Plus, having healthcare is good. A healthy population is a happy population, is a hard-working population. It works together. It's healthy, happy, hard-working. This is a basic conservative idea. Often not considered conservative, but it is. So you've got that. So now we have a health system, we have police. Health system probably includes ambulance. Oh, what happens if things start having a fire? Because weapons are dangerous. We're going to need a fire service. Okay, so we've got a health service, police service, fire service, education. We'll need a Ministry of Justice and justice system if we're going to have prisons and all those things. We're going to have a police, because we can't have one without the other. And then we have the armed forces. And then we have the taxation to pay for it all, and we have the infrastructure. So very quickly, your small government starts expanding because, oh, well, we're going to need scientific research. We're going to need some way of organizing that. We're going to need all sorts of things for people to do. Now, I do agree there are things which I would like government to get out of. There are things which you sit there and go, why? But there are also things which actually potentially it would be worthwhile being a bigger being under government control. For example, I am not a big fan of outsourcing of defense contracts in terms of security or in terms of things like tugboats and infrastructure. Why? Not because I have anything against the companies and the people who work for them. I think they'll do a grand job. I'm sure they'll work very hard. But the trouble is, the example often given is when you ask the armed forces to monitor, let's say, the English Channel, they'll turn up with 4 aircraft, 6 flight crews, and a whole team of maintainers, and there'll be an aircraft airborne 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, you can write a civilian contract for a civilian company to provide the equivalent of that, but it's going to be expensive. And normally, when a civilian company tenders and says, oh, we'll do it instead of the armed forces, what they're saying is they're going to provide 1 or 2 aircraft, 3 or 4 crews. And the aircraft will be available when you need it, but it'll be on the ground until you need it. It won't already be in the air. It's a different of modus operandi. One is wasteful. Having the aircraft in the air constantly, needing to maintain it, constantly exercising the crews, when there's nothing actually happening, is wasteful. It means you're available immediately if you do see something, if something does happen, or you might well see something happening, which is great, and that's a visible deterrence. But it's also wasteful if you're talking about it from a business perspective. So, defense debate of the 1980s, it gives us a lot of content, and it's a nice starting off point for the next 3 videos. And eventually, probably the reply to the comments. Anyway, take care, have a nice day, and if you like the videos, please press like or subscribe. Maybe consider joining us on Discord, pressing the little bell down there, or perhaps even joining on Patreon to fund my growing book habit. well, ever-growing book habit. Thank you and take care.